Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. David Miller stood outside his daughter's bedroom door, knuckles raised, hesitating for the third time that week. The door, always locked these days, stood between him and 16-year-old Emma like the concrete wall of emotional distance that had grown between them since her mother's death 2 years ago. "Em, dinner's ready," he called, trying to keep his voice light. A muffled, "Not hungry" was the only response. David's shoulders slumped as he retreated downstairs to the kitchen where 2 plates sat waiting. He'd made Emma's favorite, spaghetti, and meatballs from her grandmother's recipe, hoping it might coax a smile from her increasingly solemn face. Instead, he covered her plate with plastic wrap and placed it in the refrigerator beside the untouched meals from earlier in the week. As a single father working 60-hour weeks at the construction company, David was struggling. When Eleanor died, he'd promised to give Emma the world, to be both mother and father, to never let her want for anything. But lately, it seemed the only thing Emma wanted was to be left alone. Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality. David ate alone at the kitchen table, scrolling through pictures on his phone. Emma as a gap-toothed 7-year-old on her first bicycle. Emma and Eleanor baking Christmas cookies, the 3 of them at the beach the summer before Eleanor's diagnosis. The images twisted something deep in his chest. How had that smiling, carefree girl transformed into the guarded stranger upstairs? After dinner, David walked past Emma's room again. The faint sound of her voice drifted through the door, but she wasn't playing music or watching videos as he would have expected. She was speaking softly, deliberately, as if reading something aloud. "Em?" he called again. The voice stopped abruptly. "I'm doing homework," Emma replied, her tone making it clear she didn't want to be disturbed. Later that night, after Emma had finally emerged to grab some crackers before retreating back upstairs, David noticed something unusual on the kitchen counter, a receipt from the pharmacy down the street. But it wasn't for the usual teenage purchases, no shampoo or face wash or feminine products. Instead, it listed several items that made no sense. Compression socks, arthritis cream, large print. Playing cards and something called memory journals. David frowned, studying the receipt. What would Emma need with arthritis cream? And memory journals. He flipped the receipt over, noticing an address scribbled on the back in Emma's handwriting. Sunset Haven Nursing Home. A nursing home? David's confusion deepened. Was Emma volunteering there for school credit? She hadn't mentioned anything about it. Then again, she barely spoke to him at all anymore. The next morning, David knocked on Emma's door to say goodbye before work. No answer. He tried the handle, still locked. He called her name, but the silence suggested she might be sleeping. He slipped a note under her door reminding her about dinner together that night. As he turned to leave, he noticed something that made him stop cold. The tiny metal key that usually resided under the hallway plant pot, the spare key to Emma's room, was missing. David's day at the construction site passed in a blur of distraction. Twice his foreman had to call his name to snap him out of worried contemplation. By lunchtime, he'd made up his mind. He would speak with Emma's teachers. Something wasn't right, and as her father, he needed to know what. The call from Emma's history teacher confirmed his suspicions. "Mr. Miller, I'm glad you called. Emma has missed my class 4 times in the past 2 weeks. When she does attend, she seems distracted." The English teacher shared similar concerns. Emma, once an enthusiastic student with perfect attendance, had become withdrawn, turning in assignments late or not at all. The school counselor was equally worried, noting that Emma often disappeared during lunch periods. David's stomach knotted with fear. Was she using drugs? Had she fallen in with a dangerous crowd? The thought of his daughter, his little girl, wandering into trouble while he remained oblivious made him sick with guilt. That evening, determined to break through her walls, David arrived home early with Emma's favorite takeout and a small potted succulent as a peace offering. But the house was empty. Emma's backpack was thrown carelessly on the couch, but she was nowhere to be found. He tried calling her cell phone only to hear it ringing upstairs in her bedroom. Now truly worried, David checked the time. Nearly 7 in the evening and dark outside. Where could she be? As if answering his silent question, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Mrs. Winters from Sunset Haven. Emma asked me to let you know she's helping with game night and will be home by 8:30. Relief flooded through David, quickly followed by confusion and then anger. She was at the nursing home again? Without telling him? Without taking her phone? When Emma finally returned home, she seemed surprised to see him waiting up. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes brighter than he'd seen them in months. "Where have you been?" David demanded, his worry manifesting as frustration. Emma's expression immediately shuddered. "Out. I told Mrs. Winters to text you." "That's not how this works, Emma. You can't just disappear without telling me where you're going. And what's this about missing school?" Emma's face hardened. "Are you spying on me now?" "I'm parenting you," David countered. "Your teachers called me. Your grades are slipping. And apparently you've been spending time at a nursing home without bothering to mention it to me." "It's not a big deal," Emma muttered, but her eyes darted away from his. "Not a big deal? You're skipping school, Em. And what are these?" He pulled out the receipt he'd found. "Arthritis cream? Memory journals? What's going on with you?" Something flashed in Emma's eyes, hurt, anger, disappointment, before she snatched the receipt from his hand. "You went through my things? How could you?" "I didn't," David began, but Emma was already storming upstairs. "Just leave me alone," she shouted before slamming her bedroom door. The decisive click of the lock followed. David stood at the bottom of the stairs, feeling more lost than ever. That night, he tossed and turned, his mind racing. When morning came, he made a decision. Emma had left early without saying goodbye, and her spare key had never been returned to its hiding place. After calling in to work, David found himself standing in the hallway again, looking at her locked door. This time, he had a small screwdriver. With a trembling hand, he released the simple push-button lock and pushed the door open. "I'm sorry, Em," he whispered to the empty room. "But I need to know what's happening to you." The first thing that struck David was how orderly Emma's room appeared, so unlike the chaotic space of most teenagers. Her bed was neatly made, books arranged alphabetically on shelves, and her desk was organized with military precision. It was as if she'd created a small pocket of control in a world that had spiraled beyond her grasp when her mother died. David hesitated, suddenly feeling like an intruder in his daughter's private sanctuary. But concern for her well-being pushed him forward. He moved carefully through the room, searching for anything that might explain her recent behavior, her school absences, the strange purchases, her secretive trips to the nursing home. On her desk sat a stack of spiral-bound notebooks, each labeled with a name: Mr. Brenner, Mrs. Kaminsky, Mr. Washington, Miss Eleanor. David's breath caught in his throat at the sight of his wife's name. His hands trembled as he opened the notebook. Inside were not the angsty diary entries he had feared, but meticulous documentation, dates, times, and detailed accounts of conversations. Emma had recorded memories, stories from Eleanor's childhood, descriptions of their family vacations, the story of how David and Eleanor had met. Some entries were written in Eleanor's distinctive handwriting, evidently from before her condition deteriorated. "Mom always said stories are how we live forever," read one entry in Emma's careful script. "I'm saving her stories before they fade." David's vision blurred with tears as he opened another notebook labeled Mr. Brenner. It contained similar entries: childhood memories, war stories, accounts of marriages and births and careers spanning decades. The entries were dated regularly over the past 6 months. A photo album sat beside the notebooks. Inside were pictures of Emma with elderly residents at what must be Sunset Haven. Emma playing chess with a bald man in a wheelchair. Emma reading to a tiny woman with snow-white hair. Emma helping a stooped gentleman plant flowers in a garden box. In every photo, Emma was smiling. Really smiling. Not the forced grimace she'd worn around David for months. Tucked between the pages were handwritten notes. Dear Emma, thank you for listening. No one has asked about my wedding day in 30 years. You made an old woman feel young again. Margaret. To my friend Emma. Today you helped me remember my son's voice. God bless you, child. Joseph. Emma. I have forgotten many things, but I will not forget you. Thank you for saving my stories for my grandchildren. Rose. David sat heavily on Emma's bed, overwhelmed. His daughter wasn't in trouble. She was helping preserve the fading memories of elderly people who had no one else to listen. But why hadn't she told him? In her closet, David found a plastic storage bin containing more evidence of Emma's secret. Life, handmade greeting cards, small hand-knit items, beaded bracelets, clearly gifts from the residents. Beneath them lay a folder labeled Memory Preservation Project, containing articles about memory loss, therapeutic techniques, and handwritten notes on interviewing methods. On the inside cover, Emma had taped a photograph of Eleanor in her hospital bed, smiling weakly. Beneath it, she'd written, "For Mom, whose stories I couldn't save in time." The realization hit David like a physical blow. While he had buried himself in work to escape his grief, Emma had channeled hers into something beautiful, preserving the stories of others because she couldn't preserve her mother's. He carefully replaced everything, his heart aching with a complicated mixture of pride, sorrow, and shame for not understanding what his daughter had been experiencing. As he turned to leave, he noticed something on Emma's nightstand that he'd overlooked before. A small digital voice recorder with a label reading, "Final Project, Do Not Touch." David's finger hovered over the play button, curiosity warring with his newfound respect for Emma's privacy. Before he could decide, he heard the front door open downstairs. Emma was home. David rushed from Emma's room, closing the door behind him just as her footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. He hurried to the kitchen, trying to compose himself, his mind reeling from what he'd discovered. "Dad? What are you doing home?" Emma asked, dropping her backpack on the counter. David turned to face his daughter, seeing her clearly for the first time in months. Her eyes, so much like Eleanor's, watched him warily. "I took the day off," he said carefully. "I thought maybe we could talk." Emma's expression turned guarded. "I have plans this afternoon." "At Sunset Haven?" The words slipped out before David could stop them. Emma stiffened. "How did you—" "Mrs. Winters texted me. Remember?" David said quickly, grateful for the excuse. "Emma, why didn't you tell me about your volunteer work there?" She shrugged, focusing on unpacking her bag. "You're always busy, and it's not a big deal." "Not a big deal? Helping elderly people preserve their memories it's incredible." Emma's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "How do you know what I do there?" David faltered, caught in his lie. The hurt and betrayal that flooded Emma's face told him she already knew the answer. "You went in my room. Didn't. You?" Her voice trembled. "You went through my things." "Emma, I was worried. Get out." Her words were quiet but firm. "Please, just let me explain. Get out!" Emma shouted, tears streaming down her face. She ran upstairs, the slam of her bedroom door echoing through the house. David stood frozen in the kitchen, the fragile hope of reconciliation shattered. He'd violated her trust at the very moment he'd begun to understand her. The next day, Emma refused to speak to him. And the next. She came and went like a ghost, leaving for school before he woke, returning only after he'd gone to bed. The door to her room remained firmly locked. Desperate to understand his daughter's world and to make amends, David found himself driving to Sunset Haven Nursing Home during his lunch break. The receptionist smiled warmly when he mentioned Emma's name. "Oh, you must be Emma's father. She's our little miracle worker. The residents absolutely adore her." She led David to a sunlit common room where a group of elderly residents sat in a circle, engaged in animated conversation. At the center stood Emma, holding a digital recorder, her face alight with purpose and compassion. "And when did you move to America, Mrs. Abramovich?" Emma asked gently. An elderly woman with arthritic hands clutched a photograph of a young couple standing before a rustic farmhouse. 1957, she replied, her accent thick. "After the revolution. We left everything behind except this picture and each other." Emma nodded encouragingly. "And your journey here, can you describe it for your grandchildren who will listen to this someday?" David watched in awe as his daughter guided the woman through her memories with skill and tenderness beyond her years. She wasn't just recording facts. She was preserving the emotional contours of a life, asking questions that brought vivid details to the surface. When the session ended, the elderly woman clasped Emma's hands. "My Marina never asks these questions. Now she will know where she comes from. Thank you, my dear." A nurse approached David as he observed from the doorway. "Your daughter has a gift," she said quietly. "Some of our residents with dementia can't remember what they had for breakfast, but they light up when Emma visits. She knows how to unlock doors that seemed permanently closed." "How did this start?" David asked, his voice thick with emotion. "She came to us about 6 months ago," the nurse explained. "Said she was working on a school project about memory preservation, but then she just kept coming back, even after the assignment ended. She developed her own methodology, combining music, photographs, and targeted questions to help access long-term memories. Her mother had early-onset Alzheimer's," David said softly. "She died 2 years ago." The nurse's eyes filled with understanding. "That explains a lot. Emma mentioned she was developing techniques she wished she'd known before." She paused. "She's creating something truly special here. We've never seen anything like it." As David watched Emma move to her next client, her recorder ready, her notebook open, he saw not a troubled teenager but a young woman channeling her pain into purpose, giving others the gift she couldn't give her mother, and he had never felt more proud. That evening, David waited patiently on the couch until Emma returned from Sunset Haven. When she entered and saw him sitting there, her body language immediately became defensive. "Emma," he said gently, "I need to apologize. Going into your room was wrong. I betrayed your trust, and I'm deeply sorry." Emma stood silently by the door, her expression unreadable. "I saw what you've been doing at Sunset Haven today," David continued. "It's remarkable, Em. Truly remarkable." A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she masked it. "You went there? Why?" "Because I wanted to understand. I've been so caught up in working and trying to provide for us that I missed what was happening right in front of me." He gestured for her to sit. After a moment's hesitation, she perched on the edge of the armchair across from him. "Why didn't you tell me about your project?" he asked. Emma studied her hands. "At first, it was just for school. Then, it became something more, something personal. Because of Mom." Emma's eyes welled with tears. "I kept thinking about all the stories she never got to tell me. All the memories that just disappeared. By the end, she couldn't even remember my name sometimes." Her voice broke. "I started wondering how many stories get lost every day. How many lives just fade away without being remembered." David fought back his own tears. "And you decided to do something about it?" Emma nodded. "Mr. Brenner was my first real subject after Mom. He fought in World War II, Dad. He stormed the beaches at Normandy. His grandson never knew, never asked. When I played the recordings for him, he cried. A small, proud smile touched her lips. Now I have 15 people I record regularly. Some of them don't have visitors at all except me. That's why you've been skipping school, David realized. Emma had the grace to look embarrassed. Some of them are most lucid in the mornings. Mrs. Kaminsky can remember her wedding day perfectly at 9 a.m., but by afternoon she gets confused. She looked up defiantly. The school stuff can wait. Their memories can't. David wanted to argue, to insist on the importance of education, but he understood now the urgency Emma felt. He'd watched Eleanor's memories slip away day by day, helpless to stop the progression. I should have told you, Emma admitted quietly. But after Mom died, you threw yourself into work. You were never home. And when you were... She trailed off. When I was home, I was distant, David finished for her. I thought if I could just provide enough money, enough stability, everything would be okay. I was wrong. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 2 years of unshared grief hanging between them. There's something else, Emma finally said. The recorder you saw in my room, the one labeled Final Project. She looked at him directly. You listened to it, didn't you? David shook his head. No, I saw it, but I didn't play it. Relief crossed Emma's face, followed by uncertainty. She seemed to be wrestling with a decision. I was going to surprise you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. For Mom's birthday next month. I've been gathering techniques at Sunset Haven, learning how to extract and preserve memories most effectively. Then I started interviewing everyone who knew Mom well, her college roommate, her sisters, her friends from work. David's heart constricted. You've been creating a memory book for your mother. Emma nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. Not just a book, a complete archive, audio recordings, photographs, written stories, even recipes with her handwritten notes. I wanted to gather every trace of her that still exists in the world and put it all in one place. She looked up at him, vulnerable and hopeful. So we'd never forget any part of her. David moved to kneel before his daughter, taking her hands in his. Emma, that's the most beautiful gift anyone could give. I was going to interview you last, she admitted. I saved your memories of her for the end because they'd be the most important ones. She squeezed his hands. But now you know, and you've ruined the surprise. Despite the accusation, her tone was lighter, almost teasing. David laughed softly through his tears. I'm still plenty surprised. Believe me. Do you think she'd be proud? Emma asked, suddenly sounding very young. Mom? Proud doesn't begin to cover it, David said, his voice thick with emotion. She would be absolutely in awe of you, Emma, just as I am. The following Saturday, David accompanied Emma to Sunset Haven. He watched from a distance as she moved confidently through the facility, greeting residents by name, stopping to adjust Mr. Washington's wheelchair blanket, helping Mrs. Kaminsky find her missing glasses. She's transformed this place, said Director Collins, who had joined David in the observation room. Before Emma started visiting, our memory care unit was quiet, residents often withdrawn. Now there's engagement, laughter. Families report feeling reconnected to loved ones they thought were already gone. David nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. We've actually implemented elements of Emma's interviewing techniques in our regular therapy sessions, the director continued. Her instinct to pair music from a specific era with memory prompts has proven remarkably effective, especially with our residents in early-stage cognitive decline. David watched as Emma set up her recording equipment at a small table where an elderly gentleman waited, a weathered photo album open before him. That's Judge Peterson, Director Collins explained. Brilliant legal mind, served on the circuit court for 30 years, diagnosed with vascular dementia last year. His family was devastated when he stopped recognizing his grandchildren. Through the window, David could see Emma gently placing headphones over the man's ears. After a moment, the judge's face lit up with recognition. Glenn Miller, director, Collins explained. His wedding song, Watch What Happens Now. Emma removed the headphones and began asking questions. The transformation was remarkable. The judge sat straighter, his eyes clearer, his hands gesturing animatedly as he described his wedding day in vivid detail. She calls it memory anchoring, the director said, using sensory triggers to create pathways back to preserved long-term memories. She smiled at David. Your daughter may have developed techniques that could advance how we approach memory care. Has she considered a career in neuropsychology? David shook his head, realizing how little he knew about Emma's aspirations. We haven't talked about college plans much lately. Well, several universities have memory research programs that would be lucky to have someone with her intuitive understanding and practical experience, Director Collins said. I'd be happy to write her a recommendation. After Emma finished, with Judge Peterson, she introduced David to several residents. They shook his hand vigorously, telling him what a treasure his daughter was, how she'd helped them recover pieces of themselves they thought lost forever. Mrs. Abramovich clasped his hand between her gnarled fingers. My granddaughter now knows. The village where I was born, the smell of my mother's bread, the color of the flowers on our farm. Before your Emma, these things would have died with me. On the drive home, Emma was animated, describing the progress she'd made with various residents and the new techniques she was developing. I'm thinking about using scent more deliberately, she explained. The olfactory sense has the strongest connection to memory. I've been experimenting with Mr. Brenner by bringing in pine needles. He used to be a forest ranger, and his recall improved by nearly 30%. David glanced at his daughter, seeing not just Eleanor's features but her passionate intelligence, her deep empathy. The director mentioned you might consider studying neuropsychology. Emma hesitated. I've been looking into programs. There's one at State that specializes in memory research. She glanced at him nervously. It's expensive, though. We'll figure it out, David said firmly. This is clearly what you're meant to do, Em. That evening, as they sat together at the kitchen table sharing pizza, a Friday tradition they hadn't observed in months, Emma suddenly grew serious. Dad, I need to ask you something important. David set down his slice. Anything. Would you... She took a deep breath. Would you let me interview you about Mom? For the memory project? The request hit David like a physical blow. He'd spent 2 years avoiding talking about Eleanor, throwing himself into work, focusing on practical matters, anything to escape the crushing weight of his grief. I know it's hard, Emma said softly, seeing his reaction. But your memories of her are different from anyone else's. The way you saw her, no one else did. David closed his eyes, memories washing over him. Eleanor laughing in the rain on their first date, her face when Emma was born, the quiet courage with which she'd faced her diagnosis. When? He managed to ask. Tomorrow, Emma said. If you're ready. David nodded slowly. I think it's time. The next morning, they sat in Eleanor's favorite spot in the garden. Emma set up her recorder, opened her notebook, and with gentle expertise began guiding her father back through 3 decades of memories. Tell me about the first time you saw Mom, she prompted, and David began to remember. The morning sunshine filtered through the apple trees Eleanor had planted the year before her diagnosis. David sat beside Emma on the garden bench, his voice growing stronger as the hours passed, memories flowing like a river too long dammed. She used to sing in the shower, terrible off-key renditions of Fleetwood Mac, he recalled, laughing through tears. And she could never remember the lyrics, so she'd make up these absurd words that made no sense. Emma smiled, scribbling, Notes. Like what? Can you remember any examples? And so it went, David recounting the small, precious details that had defined Eleanor. how she could never pass a dog without stopping to pet it, her obsession with collecting souvenir spoons from every place they visited, her habit of reading the last page of a book first to make sure it's worth the journey. She used to leave sticky notes everywhere, David remembered, on the bathroom mirror, in my lunch bag, on the refrigerator, little reminders and jokes and love notes. I never knew that, Emma said softly. I saved them all, David admitted. There's a shoebox in my closet, hundreds of them. When the interview finally concluded in late afternoon, both were emotionally drained but somehow lighter. Emma carefully packed away her equipment, while David sat quietly, his face peaceful for the first time in years. Thank you, Emma said, sitting beside him again. That was perfect. David put his arm around her shoulders. I should be thanking you. I've been so afraid of remembering because it hurt too much. But today, he looked around the garden Eleanor had loved so dearly. Today, it felt like she was here with us. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of affection. She hadn't offered in years. She is with us, Dad, in every story we tell about her. Over the next weeks, father and daughter fell into a new rhythm. David adjusted his work schedule to end earlier 3 days a week. Some evenings they visited Sunset Haven together, David, often bringing his guitar to provide musical memory triggers for Emma's sessions. Other nights they worked side by side at the dining table on what they now called the Eleanor Project, organizing photographs, transcribing interviews, selecting excerpts from Eleanor's journals. On weekends they tracked down people from Eleanor's past, her childhood piano teacher who remembered her determination to master Debussy, her college professor who kept a paper she'd written on Jane Austen, her first boss who described her as sunshine in human form. It's like we're reconstructing her piece by piece, Emma observed one evening as they sorted through mementos. Finding parts of Mom I never knew existed. David nodded, carefully flattening a dried corsage from their first date. I'm learning new things about her, too. Your aunt told me stories yesterday I'd never heard. Emma hesitated before asking, do you think it would be different if we'd done this while she was still here? If we'd collected her memories before they started to fade? David considered the question carefully. I think we did the best we could with what we understood at the time, he said finally. But what you're doing now at Sunset Haven, giving families the chance to preserve those stories before they're lost, that's the real gift. On the 3rd anniversary of Eleanor's death, instead of their usual somber visit to the cemetery, David and Emma hosted a memory celebration in the backyard. They invited everyone who had contributed to the Eleanor Project, family, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and set up stations around the garden displaying different aspects of Eleanor's life. In one corner, Eleanor's favorite songs played through speakers while photographs of her singing in community theater productions scrolled on a digital frame. At another station, guests could record their own memories of Eleanor on Emma's equipment. A third area featured Eleanor's artwork and writings, including poetry she'd written as a teenager. The centerpiece was a handcrafted memory box Emma had created, containing a digital archive of all their collected stories, photographs, audio recordings, and mementos. Beside it stood a leather-bound book titled Eleanor Miller, A Life in Stories. As twilight fell, guests gathered around as Emma and David presented the first copy of the book to Eleanor's mother. Mom always said that we live on in the stories. People tell about us. Emma addressed the crowd, her voice steady and confident. This project taught me that she was right. In gathering her story, we've kept her alive in a way that transcends physical presence. She turned to her father, eyes shining. And in the process, Dad and I found each other again. David squeezed her hand, too moved to speak. That night, after the guests had departed, father and daughter sat together on the porch swing Eleanor had loved, watching fireflies rise from the garden. I've been thinking, David said, breaking the comfortable silence. Your work at Sunset Haven, It's too important to remain just a volunteer project. Emma looked at him questioningly. I spoke with Director Collins. The board has approved funding for a part-time memory preservation coordinator position. They want you to develop a formal program they can implement across their network of facilities. Emma's eyes widened. Are you serious? David nodded. It would work around your school schedule, and the experience would strengthen your college applications for those neuropsychology programs. Dad, that's... Emma began, then stopped, overwhelmed. That would be amazing. There's more, David continued. I've been talking with a developer about creating an app based on your memory anchoring techniques, something families could use at home with loved ones experiencing memory loss. Emma stared at him in disbelief. You'd do that? For me? For you, David affirmed. For Mom. For all the families who need what you've created. He smiled at his daughter, this remarkable young woman he was only now truly seeing. You turned your pain into purpose, Em. You showed me how to do the same. Emma leaned against him, watching the stars emerge above Eleanor's garden. She promised me once that even when she forgot everything else, she'd never forget how much she loved us, she said softly. I think she kept that promise. David kissed the top of his daughter's head. And we'll never forget her, he replied. Thanks to you, her story is safe now. As night deepened around them, father and daughter remained on the porch swing, sharing memories, making plans, healing together. The locked doors between them finally open. The hidden room of grief transformed into a sanctuary of remembrance and renewed connection. In the garden, Eleanor's apple trees stood witness, their branches swaying gently in the summer breeze, dropping blossoms like blessings upon the family she had loved, and who would remember her always.